everybody. It is Romania Black, and my lucky number is 8, so... I'm pretty excited for ORB on the Movements of the Earth, episode 8. 8's my lucky number. I hope this show doesn't let me down and nobody dies. But who knows? So we met Jolenta. Last episode. I love her. She's amazing. She is quite clearly Novak's daughter. But we'll see where that goes. I'm going to call him Nowak, but she's his daughter. And so anything that happens to her will not bode well for Badeni and Akshay. So it's like, we'll just see what happens. But I have a lot of comments to talk about before we start this episode, so we just need to go ahead and dive in. But I could not wait. I had to watch this episode. So as soon as the moderators, Geen and Truck, checked comments, I was like, time to go. Bison Gaming 729. Now, the moderators did tell me, Bison, that they altered some of the text of this comment so that it wasn't spoilery. I don't know exactly what they altered it from to, so just know if I read this comment and you're like, that's not what I wrote, they altered it and then edited it and sent it to me. So they kind of went above and beyond to make sure I wasn't spoiled. So yay. But Bison Gaming 729 says the letter that Nowak was reading is the same one he had in episode 2. When he reveals that he has a daughter, he pulled out the letter that his daughter had just written for him and shows it off to his torture victim with a sense of pride. In episode 4, he refers to it as his charm. So he's been hanging on to this special letter from his daughter for 10 years. I don't know exactly what the contents of that letter are, but here's my theory. Here's my thoughts. I don't want anything bad to happen to Jolenta, because she's such a great character so far. But, I thought that about Raffle too, and look what happened. I thought that about Grass too, and look what happened. So I think that something bad will happen to her. I think she will sacrifice herself in the name and pursuit of knowledge and science and the pursuit of Raffle's quest. And I think he'll refer back to the letter when that happens. So, but I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong. I hope that Jolenta does not die, but we shall see. So, thank you, Bison Gaming, for that comment. Mihon, 6330 for episode 4, said, I heard that the little circle next to the Chi logo is a period, there's a little period, in Japanese writing. And since the period means full stop, the orbit path on the logo, together with the period, means a full stop of the earth blood knowledge is moving. Interesting. I wonder what that little degree sign in the logo is, but that gives it a little bit more context, so that's cool. So thank you, Mihon, for talking about that. And then 135 Do for episode 4 says, let me explain the pronunciation, this time for Akshi. Oh my gosh. The O you're already saying correctly, and the CZ sounds like ch in the words change and chance. But Y in Polish is not spelled with the E sound, but like the letter I in the word listen. So the sound between the L and the S letter. I hope my explanation is at least a little bit understandable. Obviously, I don't expect you to pronounce these Polish words perfectly, but it's fun to share my language to people from other countries. Thank you. Yeah, language is fun. Language is tricky. Language is diverse. And so, it's basically Akshe? Akshe? Is it Akshay? We're going to go back to the translate, because you know how that goes. I probably just was not so Polish. I like that still I'm setting for Polish. Meaning
Oczy.
Ochi? Ochi?
Oczy.
And it means eyes. Yes. So
Oczy.
Okchi. 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 I want to say Okchi because it's just fun to say, but Okchi. Okchi. I'm going to try to say Okchi. I feel like I'm speaking another language. Okchi. Oh my God. The way I say it makes it sound crazy. Anyway, thank you. I'll try my best. I will probably slip in and out, so y'all just bear with me and shield your ears. And then Tiny Truck, who's one of the moderators, says, I feel bad for Okchi. It does feel like I'm speaking a different language intentionally, because I am. Sometimes awful stuff happens and it's really hard to see the good through the bad. For someone that has had depression for a long time and has felt detached from the world, seeing his nihilistic attitude towards the world resonates with me a lot. And yeah, I hate that you've had to go through that. I know that you're probably like, you were confident in saying that because you're fine with it, but it's still like, I said that there's one thing that Akshay, I feel like there's a way we can all relate to him somehow. And that makes his character very endearing, and you just want to root for him even more. And so I feel that. I love that. So yeah, Akshay. Akshay. So we're going to go with Akshay. We're going to see Akshay. I just want to say it like over and over again now, like a chant. But anyway, thank you all so much for watching these reactions and discussions and for commenting. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much as always, but we're not going to waste any more time. We are going to dive into episode 8 of Orb on the Movements of the Earth, and we're going to get that started here in 3, 2, 1, and I see Whiteboard Coon looking at me out of the corner of his eye, but I don't think we'll need him today. Watching like 10 minutes, I'm like, never mind. But no, I don't think we'll need him today. I do think I'm going to look up some stuff while we talk through this episode. I do think I'm going to look up some stuff while we talk through it, but I don't think I'll need Whiteboard Coon for this week. You could quote me on that. But I think we'll be looking up some stuff while we talk about it. So, Badeni is... Ooh, here's the thing. Here's the thing about it all. I think Badeni has, he thinks that there's some insurance with having Jolenta be his assistant because he can use her as a scapegoat. What he does not know, and what she has not told him, which why would she, is that her dad's an ex-mercenary, and if he finds out, my biggest fear in all of this is that if Badeni is found out, it won't be Badeni that's in trouble. It will be Akshay. Akshay will be in trouble because Akshay is also a scapegoat. If they harm Jolenta, and Badeni is too much of a deacon or his status prevents Nowak from hurting him, Akshay is the other person that could get hurt. And that image from episode 1 of the person that looks like Akshay getting the pear of anguish in his mouth from Nowak makes me think that's what's going to happen. If anything happens to Jolenta and Badeni cannot be subject to be tortured, Akshay is like on the chopping block. And would Badeni give him away? Well, yes, he would give him away. Because he was just like, oh, well, you're expendable to me. This is all for me, not for you. So I love Badeni as a character, but this bitch does not care if you die. He really doesn't. He is really totally fine with you going as long as he is able to continue his work. And that is crazy. So let's talk about it. This episode is called We Must Become Icarus, which I love the myth of Icarus. I love the idea of there's so many ways that you can break it down and use it in modern context. The idea of pursuit of knowledge, but without proper adherence and understanding of wisdom around you. A lot of people interpret Icarus as a metaphor about ambition, about blind ambition, and it can be tied to that. There's lots of interpretations. I also like to think of Icarus as a cautionary tale to learn from your past, to learn from those who have preceded you. Because one thing that they talk about in this episode is Icarus didn't listen to his father. His father said, do not fly close to the sun with these wings made of wax. They will melt. You will fall into the ocean. And he's like, those who do not pay attention to history are doomed to repeat it. But also those that do not pay attention to history are not going to learn from it either. So if he had listened to his father, if he listened to what had preceded him and took note of that, he could have prevented his own demise. But he did not. His pride and his pursuit without looking into the past prevented that from happening. So I feel like it's an apt title for this episode. And I'm also glad they got out of the way the whole who wrote it, who was the problem solver, who was it. I'm glad that they got through all that in this episode, because if she had tried to pass off that she wasn't the author and it was someone else, that was just going to go nowhere. And so I'm glad that Badeni immediately is like, girl, you wrote these. You solved this problem. Something else that, again, like with Raffle that comes up that we don't get to talk about too much is the fact that she's only 14. She's just 2 years older than Raffle was, but she's still a kid. Like Badeni and Akshay are at least in their 20s. So they're at least, old enough to know better. But this poor girl, I feel for Jolenta a lot because she's ambitious, she's young, she's smart, but she's also, there is a naivete to her and a little bit of gullibility that I think is going to get her in trouble. And I think that's why Nowak was like, just keep your head down, girl, and don't say anything until, more time passes. But I don't know. I just feel like she is going to be, and Badeni even says it, she's a scapegoat. If anything happens, they'll blame her. And I'm like, she's going to get blamed. And it's like, So she says she's a library assistant. And he's like, can we meet with your master? And she's like, he's not going to be available for a while. And so like, well, fine, then just give him this message. And he asks if they can go somewhere private to talk. And she's like, I feel for her because you have these two giant imposing men beside her. Her mother must have been very short because Nowak is not short, or there's some recessive genetics going on there. And most women, I feel, they hit puberty earlier than men. They get all their height before men. So I don't think she's going to get much taller than she is now. Usually men, I feel they gain their height in their late teens if they don't, like in early teens. So she could be done growing. Poor girl. But I'm going to skip the intro. I do want to go back to the intro just for a hot second. There's the scene of the man with the golden astrolabe that's there. And I wanted to say, like, is that the old Count? Is it? I want to say it's right before. It's right in the moment where she has her hand in his hand. Yeah. Maybe it is supposed to be him. Maybe it is supposed to be the Piast, the Count. I thought it was someone else, but unless he gives the golden astrolabe to somebody else, which could be very much the case because we don't get to see his face very much, I thought it was going to be an aged Nowak, but it might be the Count. Might be that. So we'll see. So Akshay and Badeni introduce themselves to Jolenta. And as they're walking, I like that, again, Akshay is labeled as Badeni's servant. And he's like, what? And he's like, I'm giving you food and board. Of course. Badeni is very smart and very much knows that he needs to give himself insurance, especially once he figures out that the Count Piast is involved. He's like, I have to insulate myself on both ends. And so Jolenta's on one end. She's just a measly little girl who could be deemed as a witch and tried as a heretic. And then Akshay is too dumb for his own good and so pure, but also isn't very clever. So he's like, if anything else goes south, I'll blame him as well. And then I will be fine. And it says a lot for Badeni's character that he can be so ruthless and so vicious, and yet we still like him. So, I mean, unless you just don't like Badeni's character, but I feel like a lot of people like his character. I was sent by the central abbey to serve as a village subdeacon. One thing that I absolutely love is the confrontation between Badeni and Jolenta, where she's like, oh, you're from that central abbey? And then later on in the episode, he's like, you're working for that count? Like they both are with friends, and they both have friends in high places. And so they both realize that about each other early on in the episode. It makes for a really good little kind of parallel between them. So she asks, if I may ask, what I love how earnest she is. She's like, if I may ask, what is your position on the problems of the universals? I love that she immediately feels like she can engage with Badeni, like she's talking to a colleague. And one thing that I appreciate about Badeni, even though he is very much establishing her as a scapegoat and like, I'm going to throw you under the bus, girl, if worse comes to worse. What makes that premise so interesting is that he doesn't look down on her at all. He knows she's smart. He gives her credit and where credit is due. And he recognizes her as an equal. He just, at the same time, is like, society doesn't recognize you as an equal. So if worse comes to worse, you're going to have to go first. He's treating this situation like a zombie apocalypse, where if the zombies come to get them, he's like, girl, I can run faster than you. Sorry. It's like that scene from Scary Movie 2 where she's like, I'm going to miss you, girl. And like the one girl keeps running. Like that's what Badeni is going to do. He's literally like, if things go south, you will be shoved under the bus before it gets to me. But you know, in other situations, like with Colby in the last episode, Colby was not giving her any time of day. He was treating her as an inferior person. He was recognizing she was doing the work, but he wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of knowing that he understood that. Badeni very much gives her credit. He's like, oh, she's smart. She's clever. But he's like, I know how this society works, and I'm just going to use it to my advantage. So when she asks him this question, he says, I'm a nominalist and I support Abelard. So Abelard and Abelard nominalism. Let's look at that. So Peter Abelard is from 1079. Crazy talk. Is a medieval French scholastic philosopher, a leading logician, theologian, teacher, musician, composer, poet, all of the above. He is celebrated for his logical solution to the problem of universals via nominalism and conceptualism in his pioneering intent in ethics. Referred to as the Descartes of the 12th century, he's a forerunner of Rousseau, Kant, and Spinoza. He's credited as the chief forerunner of modern empiricism. So in Catholic theology, he's best known for his development of the concept of limbo. Oh, okay. I know just enough about Catholicism to know that they believe in limbo, right? Or purgatory, or that place in between heaven and the earth. He paved the way for later epistolary novels. I feel like I'm failing the English language today. That's how bad it is. So I want to find where he talks about nominalism. I want to get into that. Where's the discussion of nominalism? I want to find where that is. What have we got about there? Okay. The theory of nominalism asserts there is no entities of certain sorts. So in metaphysics, what do we have about nominalism? It asserts there are no entities of certain sorts. Precisely which entities it excludes depends on the relevant variety of nominalism, but it denies the existence of universals or abstract entities. For those who accept nominalism, a central challenge in metaphysics is to make sense of phenomena that are anti-nominalist and explain via universal abstracts. For instance, anti-nominalists often rely upon universals to explain similarly, propositions to explain linguistic meaning, etc. They're talking about Platonism. Interesting. So he says Abelard's concept of moral righteousness and wrongness follows his belief that God is both goodness and love, and we are thus commanded to love God and neighbor. Good intentions demonstrate love for God and neighbor. Bad intentions are scorned. Which again comes to the idea later on that, I liked the Count brought up this idea that the text is written, they consider the Holy Scripture to be the truth, but it's whether you're interpreting it correctly or not, which is wild. Again, the fact that this one philosopher was saying this is how you should view the Bible and view the text just kind of proves that point, that it really is how you are interpreting it is on an individual basis. And it just, that leaves it open in a lot of ways. It's crazy. So he's like, I support Abelard. And then she says, my master is a nominalist. She says, but he supports Occam. So Occam, how is Occam versus Abelard? What is the difference between them? So nominalism and semantics, there's a book about it. Okay, Occam, the nominalist, the only real universals are universal concepts in the mind and universal spoken or written terms expressing these concepts. Material supposition, in which it doesn't signify. I want to look up Occam here. What do we have about Occam? William of Occam was around 1287, so a little bit later. And so he is considered one of the major figures of medieval thought. Oh, he's the one behind Occam's razor. Okay, well, when we said Occam, I was like, is that the same as Occam's razor? Which we've talked about this in other series, maybe even this one as well. But it is the idea that the philosophical razor advocates that when presented with competing hypotheses about the same prediction and both hypotheses of equal explanatory power, one should prefer the hypothesis that requires the fewest assumptions. So it's going with like, what is the simplest, quickest way to the truth, essentially. Occam's razor is used as an abductive heuristic in the development of theoretical models rather than a rigorous arbiter between candidate models. So it's basically like, let's choose the most logical conclusion and go with that one. Interesting. Okay. So I like that Badeni calls what she's looking at as radical. I was like, this little radical 14-year-old, go her, go Jolenta. Says William of Ockham was a pioneer of nominalism and is considered the father of modern epistemology because of his strongly argued position that only individuals exist rather than super individual universals, essences, or forms, that universals are products of abstraction from individuals by the human mind and have no extra mental existence. He denied the real existence of metaphysical universals and advocated the reduction of ontology. He's sometimes considered an advocate of conceptualism rather than nominalism, for whereas nominals held that universals were merely names or words rather than realities, conceptualists held that they were mental concepts. The names were the names of concepts which do exist, although only in the mind. You know what? I'm not going to get whiteboard Q out for this, but essentially, we've actually talked about this in other series. And if you ask me what those series are right now, I would be like, well, I can't tell you the names of them, but we have talked about these in other series. I know we have. But this idea, maybe it was it Revolutionary Guillotina that we last talked about this? Wild times. But the universal is not a mere word, but mental substitute for real things, and the term of the reflective process. For this reason, Ockham has sometimes been called a terminist to distinguish himself from a nominalist or a conceptualist. So the way I understand it, and I am abbreviating and paraphrasing to the most high extreme, is the way that I can think of it is that with nominalism, there's this concept of universals, like a chair is a chair. A chair is a chair. A chair is a chair. It's a chair. But then you have conceptualism, which says, well, it's a chair because we call it a chair. But what if we called it a splih? Is it a chair or is it a splih? Is it a universal concept, or do we just give it a label to give it a universal? Is it rather a concept, we give it a name, but if that name changes, does the object itself change? And your brain starts to fry at that point. So, I mean, I always love this debate because I have a friend that is very literal. My best friend is very literal minded, and they're like, no, a chair is a chair. And I'm like, well, but what about it in Spanish? It's something different. So then and they're like, stop being abstract. It's like, I'm not being abstract, but it really is. It's fascinating to think about. Like, we give things names to give them meaning and to define them, but that name can change, even though the object, and it's like, well, the object doesn't change, so then what do we do with it? And so I love it. I think it's so fascinating. And I love that these two have this conversation about it and about what they support. And you could tell immediately that Jolenta is happy to be able to talk with someone about this without prejudice, because the whole time she's been in this school, whether the Count realizes it or not, which I'm like, how could the Count not realize? Honestly, we're going to talk about that scene when we get to it. But she has been afraid to speak up because she's been left out of the conversation intentionally. And she knows that she has. And the people who've left her out know that they have. So she hasn't really had any chance to talk with someone about these concepts without the fear of persecution. And here, she can talk to Badeni, and he not only respects her, but he responds in kind, and they have a genuine dialogue, which is so cool. He's like, well, Occam's fairly radical, isn't he? And she's like, yes, but the pursuit of truth requires a certain boldness. And it's so funny that she says that as she slowly retreats, and she gets quieter, and she's like, the pursuit of truth requires a certain boldness, you know. I love that. I love that conversation that they have. He's like, how courageous. I'm quite impressed. She's like, oh, it's nothing like that. And he's like, did you apply that stance to my problem? And then she gives herself away. And Aksha's like, man, her master must be really good. I love then Badeni's like, she's perfect. She's smart. She's intelligent. This will work out great. And Akshi's like, yeah, our master seems like a real nice guy. Oh my God. He must be smart to hire such a clever maid. Never change, Aksha. Never change. You're too pure and too sweet and never change. But here's where it gets a little bit sinister. Because Badeni's like, no, she's obviously the one that we need. And he's like, she's a valuable resource. What's so crazy is that he respects her and he talks to her on the level of equals. But at the same time, he's not objectifying her, but he's also othering her in the same breath because he's treating her as a resource. He's like, if something goes awry, we can talk her in. We can probably talk to her without fear of being turned in. He's like, she's great because he's like, she's going to go along with what we have to say and she's not going to turn us in because if she does, we'll just say she's a witch. She's a woman. So she has no authority to do anything against us. Which is, the wild thing is Colby was doing the exact same thing, except Colby was not going to give her any credit and Colby was not going to treat her as an equal. Badeni's treating her as an equal, but he's also saying, like, we can use her and she can't do anything about it. I'm like, if she turns us in, she'll be charged as a witch. And Aksha's like, oh my God. He's like, should we be doing this? He's like, that's rather cruel. And Badeni says it's reality. So Badeni and Colby are not too dissimilar, but the ways that they are dissimilar is why I like Badeni's character and I don't like Colby's character, if that makes sense. And then poor Akshi's like, man, women got it tough, man. I think Guts and Berserk said the same thing. Like, Akshi's like, man, women's got it hard. I only mean that a woman is more advantageous than a man. Whether we tell her or not remains to be seen. I think she'll figure it out. I don't think she's dumb. So they go to this study where they can talk. And he talks about how, only someone as well versed in astronomy could be, able to solve this problem. And he's just dangling that carrot out in front of her, waiting for her to take a bite. He's like, that's wonderful. It's a fascinating subject. And she's like, yeah. People long ago had some fairly astounding ideas. So what's interesting is Badeni tries to probe her for information and start talking about these kind of controversial figures to see how far he can go in the conversation. And to Jolenta's credit, whereas Raffle back in the day would have been like, well, yes, this and yes, this, because he took, his privilege in that moment and used it. She knows that she can't talk about controversial things without the potential of getting in trouble. So she's not dumb. So Badeni brings up Heraclides, brings up Ponticus. Oh, okay. Interesting. I want to go back to this. Heraclides Ponticus, the philosopher and astronomer. I've heard of Ponticus. So a Greek philosopher and astronomer born in Heraclea Pontica, migrated to Athens, remembered proposing that the earth rotates on its axis from west to east once every 24 hours, hailed as the originator of the heliocentric theory, although this is disputed. Okay, so yeah, his father was Euthyphron, a wealthy nobleman who sent his son to study the Platonic Academy in Athens under the founder Plato. According to Suda, Plato, maybe that's where I heard of Ponticus. Yeah, maybe from reading Plato in rhetoric classes. All of his writings have been lost. Only a few fragments remain, as it goes, although some historians have proposed that Heraclides taught that Venus and Mercury revolve around the sun, a detailed investigation of the sources show that nowhere in ancient literature mentioning Heraclides of Pontus is there a clear reference for the support of any kind of heliocentric planetary positions. Interesting. I love it. So he brings that up. He's like, are you familiar with this pagan? And the thing that's so sad is that... The thing that's so sad that I like that this episode addresses is when Jolenta talks about wanting to study the pagans from before, but she feels like she can't because that's forbidden. And when you think about it in the grand scheme of things, that's so silly. That's so silly. It's like it's saying that, oh, we can't read this one text because it contradicts what we believe. I mean, it's the big religious debate, but I personally, I have my own religious beliefs myself, but would I be willing to read the Quran or read Buddhist texts or read something else? Well, yes. If you are worried so much that your beliefs are going to be shattered by reading something else, then your faith isn't that high. Your faith isn't that powerful or that strong if you're so worried. Like, you can read, I feel you should be able to read any text and walk away from it still having your faith and still having your convictions, but knowing more and being more knowledgeable. All right? If anybody tells you that you can't read a certain text because it would be against that, then they're afraid that when you read that, you're going to go against what you've read before and that your faith isn't going to be as strong, is what the fear is. And that shouldn't be the case, right? So I find that interesting. Then we have Philolaus. Philolaus is a philosopher, pro-Socrates, of course, born in Greek colony, from 470 BC, figures in Pythagorean tradition, has been called one of the three most prominent figures. He argued that at the foundation of everything is the part played by limiting and the limitless, which combine in harmony. With his assertions that the earth was not the center of the universe, geocentrism, he is credited with the earliest known discussion of the concepts of heliocentrism. Which is so interesting because we just talked about somebody that was considered the founder of it, and yet he's considered the founder before that. So again, these ideas have been around for thousands of years. And so they continue on because as long as humanity exists, someone will come by to question and to seek the truth and to find knowledge. You cannot completely snuff it out. Societies can try and have, but there will always be people coming back around to those ideas, right? Which is so interesting to me. According to Plato's Phaedo, he was the instructor of Simmias and Cebus at Thebes. At the time that Phaedo takes place in 399 BC, would make him a contemporary of Socrates and would agree with the statement that Philolaus and Democritus were contemporaries. So interesting. Yeah, anyway, so he's questioning her about all these figures that are tied to heliocentrism. And she calls it this ridiculous theory. And of course, Badeni's like, well, yes. Like, Badeni knows that she knows what he knows. And he's ready to kind of exploit it. As I recall, this ridiculous theory you speak of was that a mysterious central fire was the center of the universe. Which I kind of love that because that central fire, we've seen it throughout like modern literature, throughout the ages and poetry. I mean, I'm watching The Summer Hikaru Died, and the idea of this fire being a soul in the center of a body is akin in that series as well. So the symbolism lives on. But humankind lives on a side of the earth where the fire cannot be seen. And then it shows like the planets rotating around it and the sun. So yeah, but the idea is that the earth moves and the earth is not the center of the universe, which is why it's considered ridiculous in a theory because it goes against geocentrism. And I do appreciate that Jolenta is not dumb. She immediately realizes that this conversation is problematic and could get her in trouble. And he's like, well, I'm a subdeacon. I'm with the church. And she's like, oh. And she's like, his theory does seem a bit laughable in this day and age. And so then he starts talking. She's like, as, of course it was God's will that placed Earth at the center of the universe. And Aksha's like, hey, we've been talking about that whole Earth is an unhappy place and how it might not be the center of the universe thing, but he doesn't mention any of it because, of course, it's Badeni and her conversation. But you can see him getting kind of uncomfortable about it at that moment. And so Badeni brings up, the theory that's similar to the ridiculous one we're discussing. but his ideas were a bit different. And she sees where this is going, and she's a little bit worried about it. And he's like, oh, yes, the globe. I like that we have the globe here, and it shows how they viewed the world at the time, and there's all the ocean because the other parts of the world weren't listed on there. So then we have Aristarchus of Samos, a Greek astronomer and mathematician. So I've been to this page before somehow. I'm not sure why I have been to this page, but I have been to this page. Maybe it was back earlier on in the series. But yeah, it was just when we were discussing the theories of Aristotle and Ptolemy. And so he's related to heliocentrism as well. The stars should exhibit a parallax, a movement of the stars relative to each other as the Earth moves around the sun. But since stellar parallax is only detectable with telescopes, it was not observed at the time. He reconciled this issue by postulating that the stars were other suns that were very far away, far enough that it was not observable. This implied a universe much larger than had been believed. It's so wild to me how you can go through, look at all these philosophers, all of these astronomers, and they're all just a little bit off, but they're all kind of on the right track. And even now, we're still discovering things. I watch Hank Green. I watch John and Hank Green online because I really like Hank Green and his scientific stuff. And he had a video out a few days ago as I'm recording this, where he was talking about how they're just now realizing that there could have been life on Mars, and there could be like bacteria and stuff that could be transported back to Earth and studied and things like that. But just the idea of that video talking about life on Mars and how throughout the past 40 or 50 years, our understanding of Mars as a planet and what we've discovered with it has radically changed and is developing and evolving. It feels like you're living through history in the moment with science and just learning about the universe. Like it fascinates me that we're living in a time where there is technology to be able to see things that these men could only dream of, that these men would have. Could you imagine these philosophers with a telescope, with the philosophers with the observatoriums that we have now? Like, they would lose their shit so quickly and would be like, what are y'all doing on your phones? The stars. And so it is so awe-inspiring when we're talking about it in this series to think of how far we've come as people and in such a short time relatively. So it's wild. I love it. I love this series brings it up. So he takes the model and she's like, I don't know where this is going. He's like, we're discussing what you're going to tell your master. The ridiculous theories that those men spread. He's like, what if we took heliocentrism and proved the geocentric method wrong? What would happen? And then she's like, well, there would be chaos. The church would be in chaos. Like, everything would be chaotic if that were to happen. And he's like, yeah. She's like, their ideas blaspheme against the church. It would challenge authority and all of our assumptions. We couldn't keep the world that we have now. And I like Badeni's like, do you want to keep it the way that it is? Which to her, she clearly does not, but she has made herself complicit in that world because she's found a way to have a layer of safety within it. If I just move between these parameters, I will be fine. And that in itself, especially nowadays, is so transparent as a reflection upon our own selves that if you are within a place of privilege, you can skirt along and stay complacent very easily. It's only when you're a marginalized group or a group that's being oppressed that's difficult. But once you find yourself in that place of privilege and safety, it's hard to want to be bold because that could put that in jeopardy. And we see that so much today. And this series bringing this out is just absolutely crazy. So Badeni's saying, what if we are born with not only sin, but freedom as well? Which I absolutely believe that. Yes, people sin all the time, every day. But you also have freedom as well. You're not bound to despair. If many of the things that we obey and believe and the reality we perceive are actually lies. I love him like just moving the globe as he says all this, and she's like, well, that's unthinkable. It defies common sense. And that's true within the boundaries of common sense. I love when he brings the orb up to his face, but within the bounds of these ridiculous theories. I love it. And then he's like, you know, he spins the globe. What if our world really does move? That, it honestly puts everything at stake in this moment, because, you know, we've talked about what's at stake with the earth moving with Raffle and Hubert and all of this and what it means about the church and their authority. But Badeni kind of lays it on the line for her. He's like, if you prove the earth moves, then you prove that classism doesn't mean shit, that we all have freedom, that the authoritative shackles placed upon us as a society are not bound. And he's like, it will change and radicalize everything that we know. And that's how much is at stake here. In that universe, God assigns no classes, and there is no basis for enduring despair. And that's where she's like, nope. She's like, if I listen anymore, because it's what Jolenta wants. She wants to live in a world where there is no class system, where she can study, where she's not bound by this sexist rhetoric in this society that she's facing with the school that she's in. And she wants all of that, but she knows the price to get that information out. And she's like, she's not ready in this moment to lay down for that. And she knows that these guys can talk about it. She's like, you can talk about it, Badeni, because you're a subdeacon. Like, you are in a place of privilege. She's like, I'm not in a place of privilege to talk about that. And she's like, you need to get out. Oh, I love when she's like, we have only one thing to pursue, and that's truth, is what Badeni tells her. And she wants to believe it so badly, but I feel like one thing I like about Jolenta's character is that there is this contemplation and this understanding of what's at stake. Raffle, bless his heart, Raffle was just like, he was Ringo Starr's darling. So he's like, I can study all these things and I'll make it work for myself because I'm a privileged young male. And she's like, no, I could die. And so it's a very different dynamic. And she's just like, nope, you need to leave. But Badeni knows that she's going to come back. He's like, we dangled that carrot. And I love that when Akshi says, he's like, was it because she's a woman that she's going to come back? And he's like, no, it's because she's a scholar. Again, Badeni recognizing her and as someone that is respectable and that is on his level is so good. It just also sucks because he knows she's expendable. Badeni's just like, these people are stupid and they'll probably kill her if we need to blame her for something. And it's like, oh my God, how could someone research something like that? And she's like, I've been interested in pagan ideas too, but the sin of studying them is on another level. And she goes to tell Colby, but he's not there in the study, which is interesting. And so she decides to go to the meeting to listen to them. And that's when the Count says that he's going to die soon. But he says, before I die, I want to try and complete our model of the universe and seek the truth. And I love the candles. I love the symbolism of burning candles in this episode, because you not only have the metaphorical connection to the wax with ICARUS and the flame of truth burning the wax, which is kind of emblematic of the entire series. Humanity is the wax. And if you seek the truth, you will learn about the world, but at the same time, you're burning and melting as you do it. You are burning yourself away seeking that truth. But the question is it worth it for you or not? Is it worth it to be ICARUS, right? Humankind, he says, is content with Ptolemy's model. But in truth, it presents few problems for us in our daily lives. But even if the public accepts it, we cannot give up on the pursuit of truth. The pagans had a myth about a figure named ICARUS. And I love, he's like, it was the ignorance of overlooking his father's warning that the wax would melt. If wax is not enough, we must build wings of steel. I love that. I love that the Count there says we have to keep on evolving and progressing, because if we stop, then we are going to fall into the ocean after our wings burn away. And someone else will build wings of steel and probably fly past us. What we lack now is to complete a true model of the universe. So then he confronts Jolenta as she climbs out of the well. He knows that she wrote the treatise. He knows that she gave it to Colby and everything. And he knows she's there to study. And he's like, don't take me for a fool. Why aren't you taking part in the meetings? What's so interesting about this moment, what's so interesting is kind of his own blindness to this, which again is kind of, the Count is in, again, a place of privilege. He is the Count. He's the guy that all these men respect because of his connection to the university, because of his own family, because of his background. They all respect him, and they only show him like the best sides of themselves. But it is interesting that he's kind of turned a blind eye to her not being there. And he's never asked any of the men why she's not there. And it's like, well, why do you think she's not there? You know? And he's like, well, why don't you take part in the meetings? And she's like, the chairman and the others haven't given me permission. He's like, oh, because you're a woman, you're a victim of prejudice, I see. And it's like, well, no shit, Sherlock. She's been there a while. You're just now noticing? Like, just. Then again, they may be right. And it's interesting that he has these, he's open-minded to an extent, but he also is kind of rooted in these outdated philosophies as well. He's like, well, I did read a treatise that said that women are more easily targets of possession from demons. And I'm like, oh my God. He's kind of like that person that is open-minded on social media, but then they also are like, well, I did hear this one thing that's like crazy extreme conspiracy theory. And you're like, no way. And he's like, well, I did hear it, but I mean, maybe it's not true. And it's like, what? So it's interesting. The Holy Scripture contains passages that indicate women should learn quietly rather than teach. Which again, it was written by a man. Those scriptures were written by men. I loved studying Sappho back when I was in college, and some people think that Sappho didn't exist. Some people believe that it was like a female persona of Socrates, which is wild to me, which is so wild that it was Socrates practicing under a feminine pen name, and I'm like, what? But I fully do believe that Sappho was a woman, and she was a woman that loved other women and wrote very detailed poetry about that. And I'm like, if you were Socrates posing as a woman, why would you write poetry about loving women if you're posing as a woman? What? No, I think that she was a student of Socrates, but because she was a woman, people didn't credit her existence, or as much as they should. But yeah, interesting. But I love her writings. If that's the case, it may be fundamentally unsuitable for a woman to debate and present ideas. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? I feel for her. She's like, is that really the truth? I love that. What's interesting is that from his background, in the flashback that we get, he is kind of in a somewhat similar state as Jolenta, in the fact that he is denounced by his family. He is denounced for his beliefs and for his attempts to research. And then it's his familial connection that gets him the privilege to do so. Honestly, with Jolenta, it's her familial connections that get her the privilege to go to the academy because of Nowak. So it's so funny how similar they are in this. He says, we don't know for certain that we are reading it correctly. Yeah, he's like, the scriptures are true, but we don't know if we're reading them correctly. He's like, bring the treatise yourself. Don't give it to Colby. I won't forgive tedious work. I love that. It's interesting that he's open-minded in this moment, being like, well, perhaps we're not looking at this correctly. And if you have things to say that could, he's all about furthering his agenda. And if she can bring to light something that will further his agenda, he's not opposed to hearing it out. The thing that happens, though, that constrains that is when the opposing side comes to bat. And so we're going to talk about that here in a second. But yeah, so Badeni is very certain that she's going to come, and she does. She shows up. And I love when he's like, what'd your master say? And she's like, I have no master. I love that she's just like, bitch, I'm done with that. I have no master. It was me that solved the problem. The balls of this 14-year-old girl. For real. Like the spine she has. I wish I had that spine. To be 14, to stand up to a full-grown man that's a subdeacon and a count, knowing her life is on the line. Girl. And he's like, will you become my assistant? And she's like, yes. And she says one thing. She says, I am not in a position to freely view the materials about the heavens. But, like, we could collaborate with my benefactor, who is Count Piast. And that's when, and that is when Badeni's like, nope, I'm out. You're with that count? She's like, I'm with that count. Like, the one person to make Badeni, like, shiver in his boots is this. He's like, we're going. She's like, he has access to every document imaginable. And he's like, listen to yourself. He'll never cooperate with us. Because Count Piast is trying to prove the geocentric model, and Badeni is directly opposed in his research to that. So he's like, why would the enemy let us research? Why would that happen? And honestly, I'm kind of here for this discussion. He's like, there's only one Piast in the world of astronomy. He's a nobleman who has devoted his entire life to protecting and perfecting the geocentric model with 50 years of detailed observations. And she's like, well, he's got 50 years of detailed observations. So if you miss this opportunity, heliocentrism will drift out of reach. The crazy part about all of this is this weird kind of bipartisan potential in this moment where what they're tempting the count with is something that he was tempted with as a young man. And what they're saying is, yes, the research we do using your observations could very well disprove everything you've worked your entire life to researching and perfecting. We could prove you wrong. But what's more important? You and your beliefs that you've researched being held as true, or the actual truth being found that is more important to know in the end. And honestly, I know that he made them leave, but then he's thinking back onto what, he experienced as a young man. You don't see that bipartisan, at least not in my country. Right now, you don't see that bipartisan exploration. It's literally the idea that we are so proud as humans that we cannot bear the fact or the idea that we could be proven wrong. And I get it. It's hard. My mother is someone that she will not admit she's wrong. And I have dealt with it growing up, with her. I'm like, she won't admit that she's wrong ever. She has a hard time doing that. And I think growing up with being around her and realizing when she's been wrong about something and her not wanting to admit it, it makes me want to strive to admit when I am wrong and to be transparent, because I know what it feels like to deal with somebody that doesn't want to do that. But it's hard because we don't like being wrong. We don't like being told we're wrong. We don't like being critiqued and criticized. Nobody does. That's so human. Humans don't like that. We're hardwired to believe we are right. And so when we're faced in the position that somebody's going to prove us differently, it's a tough pill to swallow. And for the Count, he spent 50 years of his life trying to perfect this theory and being dissatisfied that he can't perfect it. And so when the reality is put in front of him that maybe he was wrong all this time, you can't blame him for freaking out about it, being like, well, then what have I spent my life doing if it wasn't to just propose this idea that's wrong? You get it. But it's rare to see groups of people come together to be like, but the truth is most important. Like, that doesn't happen a lot. And She's like, is it more audacious than moving the earth to work with him? And Badeni's like, I love Badeni. He's like, why you using my words against me, girl? I love that in this series, twice now, a preteen, an adolescent, has schooled a grown-ass blonde man. It's great. She's like, it's true he believes in the geocentric model more than anyone. But even more than that, he believes in truth. And I feel like that line there, because the Count respects Jolenta, I feel like that line is going to be used against him. I feel like he's going to help them because he wants to see if he's right or not because of the truth angle. Now, whether or not the rest of the people surrounding him are going to let him do that, I don't know. He's like, isn't this dangerous? And then Badeni's like, well, if we're arrested, I'll say we're deceived by a witch. Badeni's like, if anything happens at this point, fine. We'll just blame her. By utilizing my knowledge, we can pin most of the charges on her. And poor Akshay is like, but is that the right thing to do? No, it is not. But yes, they go talk to him, and I honestly think that the moment Badeni started talking, the Count was instantly turned off from him because he's like, well, let me say how honored we are. And he's like, cut the bullshit. He's like, forget the flattery. I feel like if Badeni had just shut up and let Jolenta do the talking, like she just did to Badeni 5 seconds ago, they would have been fine, or at least in a better position. But Badeni, you can just tell that the Count instantly doesn't like him and doesn't like what he has to say. And so the moment he wants to like talk about completing the research is like, Akshay possesses really good eyesight, so you could use him to help with your observations. And then he's like, do you have any idea who I am? Get out. He's like, the model that you're proposing is in direct conflict with the church. But more importantly, it goes against the research that I've devoted my life to and would argue that it was wrong. And so, bad enough that we're going against the church, but even more so that it's trying to prove us wrong. And Badeni tries to say what Jolenta said, but he's like, it may be the truth. Isn't that what you really are devoted to? And that gets him to soften his grip a little bit, but I feel like Jolenta should have been the one to say it. But again, she was in no position to because she's a lady and she could get charged for some things. So they leave, even though Badeni says, we'll take our leave for today. Mm-hmm. And then he looks at the astrolabe and his wish to study back then. Honestly, that poor man in his eye bags, I feel you. But he was turned away, from his family, saying, do you think you can change history by gazing at the sky? And then he gets into this university where they have this giant model of the globe being made, which is really cool. I love it. And then you have his cousin that he meets up with. So the guy that owns the academy, he's like, I secretly asked an artisan to make it using pagan knowledge. Which again, the idea that we're using knowledge from other people, but it's fine if we do it. It's fine if we do it. That's being proposed. He also has hair like Nowak in a weird way. So I'm like, are these people all related? And then as he's pouring this wine, he says, are you a member of the Piast family? He says, in terms of bloodlines, we're cousins once removed. And he's like, that's rather distant. I'm like, cousins once removed? I've seen people, I've seen people in Kentucky use that to get married. So I guess it's far enough, but cousins twice removed would be at a family reunion where I'm from. I was like, cousins once removed is not that distant, but okay. Okay, sure. He's like, I was referred here after declaring an interest in astronomy. A worthy reason to visit a family outcast. So he says, what do you think is most important for scholarly advancement? And he says, audacity. Which again, it's so funny. The words he said, the reason that got him into the research he's doing is the very same that they are proposing to him, but it's for means that were not what he researched. So it's like, are you going to be a hypocrite? Or are you going to accept that these people are doing the same thing you're doing, just in different ways? He's like, let those people pinch their useless noses. You're true. What's also interesting here is the concept of privilege, because he's saying your proper nobility, let them pinch their noses. We know how to use our money appropriately. There's a discussion here about class and about the ruling class. The people with the money have the power in, this capitalist construct. And he's like, we can use our influence because we have the resources to do so. Whereas you have someone like Hubert, someone like Jolenta, who does not have that nobility, who does not have that, means to gain authority. And is it right that they don't get that same access to be audacious? It's good when they can be audacious because they have the money to back it up, but other people aren't allowed. And so the cousin says he wants to strive to learn about the perfection of the cosmos. And again, we talk a little bit about Hubert here, where Hubert had talked about, wanting to prove, and Badeni is kind of doing the same. The world is presented with having all of these errors. And Badeni and Hubert and this man that's the cousin of the Count are like, the public may accept that, but I don't want to accept that. I want to believe there's a reason behind it. But the reason changes as they work to perfect the model. It's great. It's kind of like there's that library that he has, and he's like, we can use the library to perfect our own findings. What they are essentially doing is the box of Raffle, is the box of heliocentrism, where you have documents and they are updated, and then those documents are updated, and you just keep on moving forward. And we've talked about this previously in this series, but I love that it's discussing the idea that science and scientific advancement is not about finding the right answers. It's about making progress and finding even more right answers than just the one and you're done, right? It's so good. So good. He's like, show me your observations. So we find out that the Count has good eyesight like Aksha, and he's given the golden astrolabe. And he's like, the superior instrument should be used by people with superior abilities. And you can begin your regular observations tomorrow. Do not waste the talent that God has given you. I love it. Devote your heart to astronomy, and one day you'll show the nearsighted fools who doubted you. But there is something, and then he talks about the pride of the family name, which goes into it. But there is something to be said about in the pursuit of perfecting the cosmos, of being a part of that history. Because if you think about it, Galileo, for example, is Galileo's theories about the universe still held today? Well, not really. But do we still remember Galileo as a figure that was a stepping stone towards enhancing and evolving our perspectives? Yeah. That's the thing. There are people throughout history who have been proven wrong and have been proven to not be correct over time, but we still value those people and their contributions to our society and to our history, because without them, we wouldn't have been able to make the advancements from what they found. So it's like, it feels like, Badeni says he wants to be the last person to perfect something, and the Count wants to perfect it. But the reality of it is that Badeni will not be the last person to talk about it. The Count will not be the last person to talk about it. And if you think that that is the case, then you are misunderstanding humanity as a whole. And it's just so good. I love talking about this show. I love talking about it. I could have brought Whiteboard Coon out, I'm sure, but I was being very contrarian and very, I was going to stick to my word this week, but I'm sure next week I'm going to bring out the damn Whiteboard Coon. You know how it goes. Sorry, I didn't mean to talk slander against you, Whiteboard Coon, but he's probably going to come out next week. So, because I have a feeling next week we're going to get cracking with trying to get the Count to go along with letting us see the observations and everything. In the back of my mind, as they are becoming Icarus, they are going to fly close to the sun. And the question is, whose wings are going to melt? Who's going to fall into the ocean and drown? And in the back of my mind, there is this knowledge that Nowak is Jolenta's father. And that man is not afraid to hurt people. And his daughter is the shining beacon of his world. And the fact that the show has conveniently not shown us him, they are saving up for it to be revealed that he is her father. In the manga, it would be a lot easier to sell. But, us watching the anime, we know that Nowak is her father. But in the manga, you don't necessarily know because they don't show his face. So they're going to wait until a moment comes where he is revealed as the father, and shit's going to go down at that point. And I don't know if I'm ready for that. But I do know that I've talked for an hour about this episode. It was amazing. I'm so excited to hear your comments down below, what you thought of this episode. If there's anything you have to add about these philosophers and about this model, about these concepts, I can't wait to hear about it. So in the meantime, I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back very soon with more philosophical conversations surrounding ORB on the movements of the earth. Bye!